Good morning, everyone. It feels like Friday, but it's just Wednesday, and here we are, Senate Education Committee. Welcome, everyone, and we'll start off with a roll call.
Madam Chairman, Senate Education, February 5th, 2025. Senator Brennan.
Here.
Senator Olson.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Senator Scott.
Here.
Chairwoman Schuler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Ashley. We are going to mix it up a little bit. Senator Driscoll's bill, Senate File 156, was scheduled to be at the end, but he thinks he can do it in 5 minutes. I'm going to put him on the clock here and see if he really can. And no, we don't really want you to hurry, but we're going to go ahead and take Senate File 156 first, the expenditure of state funds on K through 12 public schools. And with that, we'll turn it over to Senator Driscoll.
Madam Chairman, Committee, thank you very much. I bring to you Senate File 156, expenditure of state funds on K-12 public schools. I'm just going to do a 30,000-foot view of kind of what it is and where it's at. And I think this is the Education Committee. You folks are pretty familiar with it. Our major maintenance funds, we allow 10% of those to kind of be almost flex-type funding. And as we've got into it, our major maintenance, obviously, we've got millions of square footage around the state. We've allowed 10% of this money to go for basically non-major maintenance type issues. I mean, you can kind of extrapolate into it, but what this bill really does is says when we give major maintenance money, it's actually to be used for major maintenance on the buildings. So as we walk through the bill and we look at it, we talk about the 10%. And then you go to page 2, we put a sideboard on it, says no event, any school district transfer, expend funds generated foundation program defined under the statute, including but not limited to local revenues collected, doubts paid to school district. Purpose funding operational expenses chapter for major building facility replacement defined under the statute. Education building, portable buildings. We're really sideboarding this, and it prohibits them to take major maintenance money and basically build more buildings. And there's a replacement clause that comes a little later in the bill. It really says if we're going to allocate money from the state and your program for major maintenance, that's what we're going to spend it on. And the truth is we've got outside the lines, and I didn't realize quite how far until we got into the bill and the district started calling me. And we're building lots of buildings and doing lots of stuff with this piece of money. It amounts to a lot of money as you get into it. And so what this really does is sideboards it and says our major maintenance money will be there, and we're not going to spend that money on enhancements that you've built. If you want to build enhancements, you should fund the maintenance on those enhancements on that end of it. There is an amendment that's in front of you on it before I do questions that'll do some of the questions. And what the amendment does is nothing this act should prevent a school district expending funds generated by foundation program transferred to special reserve fund to complete a project that's in progress. Projects should be deemed progress only if expenditures for planning, design, or any phase of construction made prior to the effective date of the act. School districts shall report foundation program amounts expended on project pursuant to this section to the state superintendent of public instruction, the state construction department not later than July 1 of each fiscal year in which these funds are expended. Wyoming Department of Education and the State Construction Department shall report to the Joint Education Interim Committee, the Select Committee on School Facilities, and the Joint Appropriations Committee not later than September 1 each year. Project report on these funds is provided to the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, State Construction Department. That's a hold harmless clause that anything that's started in any of these districts, they're going to be allowed to finish it. If they've got the fund created, they can go ahead and continue to do it. But it's going to set a hard date that going forward, when we do major maintenance is spent on major maintenance. If you want to build buildings, do enhancements, should be included in your school plan, and you bring it through the proper channels. But let's make sure major maintenance money is exactly that. That's it in a nutshell. I'd stand for questions.
Questions for Senator Driscoll? You actually did it in less than 5 minutes. Yes, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do have a couple of questions. So on the enhancements side of it, the 10%, up to 10% for enhancements isn't to build new enhancements, it's to...
Could you talk a little louder?
My apologies, I wasn't very close to the microphone. The 10% for enhancements, or up to 10% for enhancements, isn't to build new enhancements, it's to provide major maintenance for existing enhancements the district has. How is a district to afford that moving forward? It seems like a little bit of a rug pull where their planning assumes that they have major maintenance capacity, potentially, to provide upkeep for enhancements, and now by changing the statute, there's no mechanism for that, so I would assume they would be taking out of their school foundation program account, which is even worse than taking out of major maintenance. So how do they remedy that?
Senator?
Madam Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I believe a number of the new projects coming now have sinking funds with them, and, you know, that's, to me, that's your proper way if you're going to do an enhancement on a school district, is when you get ready to build that new gymnasium or that new addition you build, is part of how you, when you fund it, there's a sinking fund with it that takes care of it, that's not coming out of the dollars that are set up under the block grant to do education. Enhancement is just that. You're creating something that's not part of our bundle of goods or our model. And if you're going to do that locally and pay for it, then you should pay for the maintenance on it as well. When you get ready to figure out how to fund it, that should be part of it.
Madam Chairman, I'm not talking prospectively. The amendment that you provided is talking about buildings that are underway, but doesn't provide any exceptions for previously existing enhancements where the mechanism was using up to 10% of major maintenance. Obviously, I mean, for my high school, for example, we had tremendous amounts of enhancements, and we were probably the prototype of school districts appropriately managing that by having funding available through our mill levy to provide the upkeep for it. So I understand moving forward, but the rug pull aspect is the fact that you already have existing enhancements where the prior funding model allowed for use of up to, and I don't think they use anywhere near 10% major maintenance for it, but up to 10% because they have to have a capacity to maintain those assets, otherwise they lose those assets, and they were not operating under a regime where they had a requirement.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Senator Rothfuss, I would be happy, you're a better craftsman of amendments than I am. I am very serious about holding harmless. This bill is not intended to harm what's out there and what's already happened.
Okay.
I am more than happy to allow up to 10% to stay in for anything that's back to the date I did in the other amendment. My honest word to all the school districts out there, I'm not trying to harm anything that's been done. I'm not trying to harm anything that's in process. But I really think it's very important as money gets tight in the state that we really focus sharply on how we spend our funds. And when we say major maintenance, we mean major maintenance, not saving funds to create more maintenance.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. Madam Chairman, I do have one other question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we haven't provisioned in statute, and I haven't tracked the bill in well enough to know, but we allowed for up to 10% use of major maintenance funds directly for security projects. And that was the legislature's decision to basically be cheap, where instead of funding security at schools, which would have cost a lot of money, we put a provision in statute which said, or you can use your major maintenance up to 10% per year to work on security projects. So that's how security projects have been funded mostly. We had a grant program at one point also, which was about, I think, like $16 million. It seems that this then eliminates that opportunity to utilize major maintenance for security projects that would not otherwise qualify for major maintenance because they're outside the scope of what major maintenance is dictated for. Is there a remedy for that?
Madam
Senator?
Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, your amendment just got longer. Like I said, that was a directive of the legislature. I was here when we did that. I don't intend to override a previous legislature, and I think it's a legitimate use of it. My real intent is not to stop what it is. It's really to get where we spend money in the right place and not spend money that creates us spending more money. And that's really, it's really hard when you put money out and part of that money gets used to create something that actually costs you more money. And so it's a sideboard. And if you come up with further, I knew I'd hit some holes. I'm not an education folks, so I tend to maybe use a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel on some of this, but it kind of gets the car on the tracks.
And that kind of gets to my last question, Madam Chairman.
Go ahead.
You know, I'm curious where this is being done, because statute does already provide that, and this causes problems actually, a very specific set of circumstances where major maintenance funding can be used, and building new buildings is not one of them. In fact, you can't even change internally a building to reprogram the space beyond its original intended purpose. That's caused problems because we have a lot of circumstances where that would be good for educational purposes, but statute precludes a district in submitting their major maintenance plan from changing the building without doing it as a specific project through the commission. So where are we seeing this done? I'm really not aware of it, this being a real problem, more of an anecdotal, they're building buildings, but a lot of times the ones I'm familiar with are coming out of like pre-97 funds or other school district funds coming out of their reserve accounts and things like that, but never major maintenance. So what are examples that you've seen?
Senator?
Madam Chairman, I can give you multiple because the districts are getting a hold of me. It's actually happening apparently because they're worried about this bill. And if what you just made as a statement, Senator Rothfuss, is true, the bill actually does nothing because it's already prohibited elsewhere in statute. So really all I'm doing is creating a sideboard on top of a sideboard. Because if either it is or it isn't happening, I'm not one to be able to judge it, you understand. But all this does is create a sideboard. If it actually isn't happening, this bill probably is just another piece in the green book that doesn't matter. But if it is happening, this is going to prohibit it.
Well, I am interested to hear what districts feel this is restricting that they were planning on doing. Because again, for major maintenance to be funded, you have to work through the commission. You have to get your major maintenance approved. The commission is looking at it relative to what statutory authorization provides. There's a first requirement that you address your high maintenance needs, and then beyond that, you work from your major maintenance plan. But I just don't know where the flexibility is to go outside of that. I don't see, is Dell here behind something?
I don't see him.
All right, because we've got pillars, so, you know, there are people here that I don't even know exist right now.
Are you suggesting pillars?
There are pillars. We could take those out with major maintenance and the problems would happen. All right, so yeah, I'll look for district participation in that since Dell's not here. Thank you, appreciate it.
Further questions for Senator Driscoll? I just have one. I know sometimes with the block grant, and, you know, of course, we talk a lot about local control. And do you think this is going to be an issue where districts are going to feel like, well, you know, the state's coming in and trying to heavy-hand us and tell us how to spend our money? Yeah, we don't like it. I mean, what's your feeling on that?
Madam Chairman, my feeling's really strong on that is I'm a huge proponent of local control. I'm also, when the state's got the investment they do, it's my obligation to make sure the dollars are spent on what we did. And I have, not just in this area, but in other areas, great heartburn when we give, for example, money for teacher salary raises, and my local district doesn't pass that money on to our local teachers. They spend it on something else. And so for me, as an appropriator and a spender of the money, it's important to me that when I send a directive down that I want the money to be spent this way, that they do it. And I started out being a huge proponent of block grants and great flexibility. And the more I've seen coloring outside of the lines within it, I've become much less a fan of block grants and much more of, that's why I brought up the pillars, a pillar and money, because I want money to hit the classroom and the kids. I'm not so worried about the rest of it. And I want my buildings taken care of. And I say my buildings because mine is all of us, every citizen in Wyoming. I want them taken care of and I want them to last. And that's when we do major maintenance money. My hope is that's what it is. Minor maintenance is different than major maintenance. Thank you.
Any other questions for the good senator? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Let's go ahead and open it up for public testimony on Senate File 156. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Dickie Shaner with the Department of Ed, speaking on behalf of Superintendent Degenfelder. She does not have a position on the overall bill, however, does want me to support the senator's amendment about grandfathering in the projects that are already underway, and in addition, supporting all of that sort of grandfathering work through an amendment that was just discussed.
Any questions for Mr. Shaner? Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Anyone else from any agencies? Please come forward. All right. If not, we'll just open it up and welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Dan Celeroli, Director of Facilities, Sweetwater County School District Number 1. I've been doing this for 21 years. I started out 10 years at UN 1. My question is, and one of the questions I have is, enhancements was also put in there for the older schools that were built by taxpayers. Evanston High School, I'm very familiar with Evanston High School, was originally built for 2,000. I remember a time when they thought about putting modulars out there because it was so big. They're nowhere near 2,000. So allowable square footage versus what the gross square footage is, whatever is left is an enhancement. So how do we fund that? And moving forward, Senator Rothfuss, he hit it right on the head. You know, he nailed it right. There are already stopgaps in there. You just don't build a building and say, hey, I'm going to add a new gym or an auxiliary gym or a swimming pool. You have to go before the School Facilities Commission. You have to submit the idea. You have to actually show funding responsibility for it. And how are you going to maintain that? Moving into the future. Then the other question I have is, if this bill passes and SJ 6 doesn't pass the voter in November, how will that affect demolitions? Because technically the state will still be responsible for building schools and demo of schools. So now are we going to go into, say, Rock Springs High School and demo the allowable square footage on state funds and have the district look at the additional enhancement square footage? You would never demo a building in the state of Wyoming. I've been, like I said, I've been doing this for 21 years, been doing this a long time. And I also did FEA, I also helped FEA when they first went around and do assessments. So I'm pretty familiar with the state and some of the conditions of their schools and what they have as far as age of schools. I just don't see this being necessary for one. And I think it really will hamstring our buildings. Senator Driscoll said, talks about his buildings. Well, I got news for you. These are my buildings too. And I want to do what's best in my district. When I left UN to 1, I was sad to see, the people that I had to leave behind. But it's also the accomplishments. I mean, what we do in our facilities is the one thing that you do and then you visually step back and see the accomplishment. And to move on is quite difficult. So we do take pride in what we do. So I just don't understand the reason for this bill. And in my opinion, it hamstrings most of the facility managers throughout the state as well as the districts. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Celeroli? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. I have two questions. One, I think it's important to stress, and I didn't note this in my questions to Senator Driscoll, but the idea that the way that we manage allowable square footage right now, and we had some legislation that we worked through to try and improve that, but right now with 115% of allowable square footage is what is effectively what you have available, or 115% based on ADM becomes your allowable square footage. And then everything in excess of that is contemplated right now as an enhancement. So if you want to provide major maintenance on anything outside of that, and I don't know what your district has, but you're probably 135 or 140% or more, I would guess. So you're using the enhancement 10% basically to try and cover the fact that the state of Wyoming doesn't provide a 100% coverage of allowable square footage. Is that accurate?
Mr. Celeroli?
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, to an extent, when we build our enhancements, we build them with like rec mill levies. So we use rec mill levy. I can't speak for my predecessor, but in 11 years that I've been in Sweetwater 1, if we added something to our buildings or we took something on as an enhancement, it is funded by the rec mill. Now, if you have a gymnasium, obviously it's attached to your school and the heat goes out, it's on the same boiler. So do we take care of it? Yes. And would that be considered major maintenance money. Yeah, it would, because generally speaking, you don't have something isolated to just one section and it's part of the building. But there are some cases where we might have to use 10%, but I can assure you, most of the time, if it's a building that, or a portion of the building that was funded by Rec Mill, it is maintained by Rec Mill.
And Madam
Follow-up?
Chairman, but
Go ahead.
on the other side, you tend to use the 10, if we eliminated this language, how would you use major maintenance on your excess square footage? Would you just not be able to?
Mr. Salarelli, go ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator Office, it's got to be maintained. So one way or the other, we'll figure it out. I mean, if it means, including it in on a major maintenance project in order to get it done, that's the other thing. We have project managers. Lance Johnson is one of our project managers. This is almost insinuating that they're not doing their job. You have a very competent school construction department, and they oversee the projects that we put in. And I've been dealing with Lance Johnson for 21 years. And if I submit something that he thinks is not appropriate, I get it kicked back. It's not a go for it. He sends it back and says, no, this is not appropriate. You can't use 10% or you can't use any money for this. So there is already a stopgap for the local facility folks.
And Madam Chairman, the
Yes,
other
go ahead.
question, outside of security, would you, or have you, applied to build a new building or a new facility, basically new construction with major maintenance funding?
No, sir.
Mr. Salarelli?
Madam Chair, Senator Office, no.
And Madam Chairman, are you allowed to under current statute?
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Salarelli?
Senator Office, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Any other questions for Mr. Salarelli? It's good to see you again,
Same here.
even though you left our district. The heck with you. No, just kidding. Go ahead, ma'am. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, Teresa Chalk, Superintendent Lincoln 1. So I guess I'm here to oppose of the bill in its entirety, but with that being said, I am in favor of the amendment of it not being retroactive, because first, most statutes aren't applied retroactively, and there could be constitutional issues with the retroactive application of disallowing funds where districts have appropriately got school facility department, school facility commission for our enhancements. And we have been allowed for years to use the 10% major maintenance to maintain them. So I've been in Kimmer since 1998. In that time, 2 years prior to me being there, we passed 4 bond issues to upgrade and to maintain our facilities. And we have the sinking fund to go with it to maintain them. But once that sinking fund is gone, we do depend on depreciation reserve, and we depend on the 10% of that major maintenance monies to maintain our facilities. I'm here today to speak on the maintenance of those facilities in my district. I don't, other than always passing bonds, which again is a district choice, our constituents have to vote to do that. But I originally was here to just make the comment that we have to be able to maintain what's already been built in our districts that has been followed the rules of the legislature, of the statutes. We've done everything the way we're supposed to do it, and the original version of this bill says, well, now, guess what? You can't maintain your buildings, so they're going to be dilapidated, they're going to be unsafe, and guess what? Our boards are still going to have students in those buildings till we figure it out. The other thing, I have 1 new building, my others are remodels, so I have a lot of extra square footage just because they're remodeled, not rebuilt and torn down to new specs. And I did there's 46 out of 48 districts who have enhancements who need this bill to die so that we can continue to maintain and have proper facilities for our students in our communities. And if you would like this, I'll give it to her to give to you. But I'm just, again, I stand opposed to this bill, and with that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for Ms. Galt? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Chalk, are you able to, or do you feel that you're able to build new buildings with major maintenance funding?
We've never built a building with major maintenance funding. If all of our buildings have been approved through the state on capital construction.
Okay, and would there be, again, it's my understanding that that's impossible, and I just am trying to find somebody who's done it or believes otherwise.
I believe it's impossible to build a building just on major maintenance funds. You have to bond or have a park and rec mill or have, like you said, pre-$97. I do not believe we're funded. I mean, as you all know, I'm sure you're aware, we've testified for years and consultants have said major maintenance is underfunded. So I don't know how any district could ever build something using major maintenance funds.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Gall? Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Did you
Any-
want this?
Yeah, sure, yeah. Maybe just hand it to our secretary and she can, somebody give us. Please come forward. Introduce yourselves, welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Andy Knapp, Executive Director of Facilities and Support Operations for Laramie One School District. I've listened to this as it's gone through the session, and the one thing that seems to be common that I've noticed in support of this is that just the very word enhancement seems to portray an unnecessary expenditure. So what I wanted to touch on a little bit, I think everyone previously has made some good points, but there is a necessity in some of these cases. And what I want to talk about, we're currently designing 2 elementary schools right now that are Title I schools. Laramie County has 9 title schools out of 30 elementaries. So in these title schools, what we see are, up to 25% IEPs, 25% of the students, over 50% free and reduced lunches. And what this equates to in these schools is additional square footage outside of the design guidelines. So what you're looking at, often we try to reduce the student-teacher ratios in these classrooms. We have pull-out rooms for intervention, pull-out rooms for academic recovery, spaces for specialists such as speech pathologists, counselors, reading interventionists, and as well as our special needs students. So when you build one of these schools, currently the design in both of them is running around 7,500 to 8,000 square feet of additional square footage if we were not building, as opposed to if we were not building a Title I school. What we don't want to do in those schools is reduce the size of the classrooms enough to where they're just a specific use. If that school ever needs to be used for something else, if it ever has to be, the programming would have to be changed from if you have a K-6 school and you need to go to a K-4 or vice versa, or a K-6 that goes to a K-3 and a 4-6 school, keeping those classroom sizes consistent allows for a lot better use of that particular school as you go forward. Or even if you have a bubble of students coming through, if you end up with a grade level that comes through, which is fairly common, that you would need more room for those students and more spaces. I think those are, that's definitely one of the biggest needs Laramie One's facing right now going into this, is how we're going to be able to pay for those enhancements. Another piece of that is in an elementary school of that size, we generally add a little bit of enhancement to the gymnasium. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If we can increase the size of that gymnasium, we create 2 teacher spaces, which then allows us in a school of 500 students to be able to accommodate all of the PE curriculum that goes through there, as well as being able to use those gymnasiums for other intended purposes. In a district such as Laramie One, we have 3 high schools. You run basketball through there, girls and boys basketball with 4 teams each. If you have a state culminating event or a tournament in town, quite often there's a need and a necessity to have an additional gym that meets the WHSA requirements. So those are used for that as well. I'll kind of hurry on through this, but the last thing I wanted to mention, another enhancement out there that we put in, and I think most districts have, and that would be turf fields. So that comes across sometimes as an unnecessary enhancement. However, we've currently been meeting with City of Cheyenne on reducing our irrigation systems, our grass fields, and the coverage we have of grass on school facilities due to water needs that are out there. That also reduces the cost of maintenance of a grass field and staff to mow and maintain and trim and stripe those fields. So there are some enhancements that I think are a necessity, and they cover a lot of other areas that people aren't considering in this. that we not only need to be able to maintain that we currently have, but be able to allow those going forward and continue with that. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for Mr. Knapp? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Who's next?
Madam Chair, Jed Ciccarelli, Chief Financial Officer with Laramie County School District 1. I'll just add a little bit to Mr. Knapp's points and maybe address some of the questions from Senator Rothfuss earlier about how we prospectively may be utilizing some of these reserve funds. But just a quick clarification point. I want to ensure that the committee understands that any gross square footage within a district that's deemed enhanced does not generate major maintenance funding. It does not add to the overall calculation that generates those resources that are provided to the school district. But this bill goes beyond just the use of the 10% major maintenance. An important aspect of how we operationalize our reserve funds, which would be restricted, is to meet those future needs. To provide one example to Senator Rothfuss' question, we were fortunate to have the federal government transfer ownership of an agricultural facility to us in the 70s. You might be surprised to know that there's no adequacy standard for an ag facility within our educational program. So that's been up to the district to maintain or provide facilities for that particular CTE program, and it's a valuable aspect of our educational program. We utilize our reserve funds to maintain those buildings, to be able to construct agricultural pole barns, and that would be significantly restricted should this bill pass. But it's also important to point out that these aren't always resources provided through recreation districts or other means or district resources or reserves. Our district, like many other, utilize federal funding under the ESSER program to invest in our facilities. We added much needed capacity to our nutrition services operation, additional freezer. We would not be able to maintain that under the current bill as drafted. Similarly, we've utilized our reserve for a very important aspect of just our normal facility operations. I imagine many of us understand the pinch on property insurance and our homeowners insurance over the last few years. A school district like ours is no different. In the 7 or so years I've been with Laramie County School District 1, we've seen our property insurance more than double. To give you an example of how that's impacted us, a few years back, we had a major hail and wind event that came through that took 3 roofs off of our school buildings. Like a lot of us, we saw our insurance coverage adjust as a result of that. So in order to control some of those insurance premiums, we knew we had to increase our deductible. Well, if we increase our deductible, we have to make sure we have the resources available to cover those type of events. So we've utilized our reserves, our special reserves, to provide an insurance contingency fund. So in the future, when we have a major event that takes a multi-million-dollar roof off of one of our buildings, we have the deductibles to cover those funds. We wouldn't be able to do that should this bill pass. And Madam Chair, I think just to echo Mr. Knapp's point on things like the artificial turf, the Campbell One cases spoke specifically to enhancements and how they were important for school districts to innovate on areas that should be available to other school districts for the proper delivery of the educational program. I think artificial turf is one of those examples that we've been able to adjust to, and would argue that that's more of a standard than it is an enhancement now. And Madam Chair, I'm happy to address any questions as well.
Any questions? Okay, wait a second, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. Jed, looking specifically at this language, like on page 2, and you might be familiar with the details based on your experience, but looking at line 8, the purposes that these funds can't be used for, the first list is for the purpose of funding operational expenses under this chapter. Is that something that's ever done? That doesn't seem like it would be something that's done operating a building with major maintenance funding. So it doesn't seem like that's problematic wording. I'm just going to try and go through these and see where the problems lie. Is that accurate?
Mr. Scott Rowley?
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, no, we would not utilize those for operating expenses.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Chairman, the next for major building and facility repair or replacement defined under statute 109A Romanet 3. I just pulled that up, and that includes site improvements like the sidewalks and parking lots. And I was actually surprised at how much is included in the definition of major building and facility repair and replacement, as long as you're not doing it continuously. So it's according to statute, anything that you're doing, which would be like a project basis, like again, we need to replace the parking lot at one of the schools would qualify for that. I assume you use major maintenance for that all the time. Is that true?
Mr. Scalarelli?
Madam Chair, Senator Office, that's correct. Those would be primarily major maintenance funds.
Okay. And then the last clause there, for a project defined under 111A Romanet 4, for any new building. And I'm assuming again that you're not building new building or for any educational building. And so the new project is probably not something that is of concern since it's not something that you'd be doing. Is that accurate?
Mr. Scalarelli?
Madam Chair, Senator Office, that is correct. Probably just with one note that the example that I provided earlier of an ag farm facility or something that's outside of those standards, we do plan for those future facility needs using foundation transfers as part of the overall funding source for those projects.
Okay, and Madam Chairman, as I look at the definition now of project, it means replacement, renovation, or new construction projects, which increase the value of the school building or facility by improving the functioning of the building, et cetera. I'm actually not sure that's allowed currently under major maintenance. I don't think renovation is, replacement is renovation.
Madam Chair,
Scalarelli?
Senator Office, in some aspects, we have been able to utilize major maintenance funds for renovations
Okay,
projects.
but Madam Chairman, you can't do a replacement and you can't do a new build under existing statute with major maintenance, as I understand it, under any circumstance. Is that your understanding as well?
Madam Chair, that's
Go ahead.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, let's move forward. Dr. Brown?
Madam Chair, Boyd Brown, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. I won't belabor a lot of things. I will say that major maintenance funds cannot be saved to build new buildings. That will not be, the state construction, school construction would not allow you to do that. They would require you to use it for something else. By statute, districts are allowed to put aside a specific amount into some special reserves account for capital construction and different things like that. And I think that might be what the bringer of the bill was looking at when we started. So my biggest concern is if you go to page 2 and you look at lines 4 through 7, it says that in no event shall any school district transfer or expend any funds generated by the foundation program. Now, the foundation program funds all of our capital construction currently. It funds all of our major maintenance currently. It funds our operations. It funds the block grants. So I see this as totally not allowing school districts to use any money that comes from those funds. So I really don't see this as doing exactly what we were looking at trying to do with that, because major maintenance can't be used as that. That's all special reserves, depreciation funds, and there's specific things that you can do with each one of those funds that you set up. So again, I think if we want an effort to do something like this, let's go through an interim session and set it up. We still are going to need enhancements. The current standards for career technical education do not make shops and classrooms the way we need them to be able to do the things we need to do there. Every one of our school districts in their junior highs or in their elementary school, if they're a different school, they put 2 or 3 feet of space on their gym so that you can hold a Wyoming High School Activities Association event in there. We all expand our elementary gyms so that they can be competition gyms lengthwise if we need them. Wyoming High School Activities Association has swim programs. We have swimming here. There's not one swimming pool across the state that has been built without it being an enhancement since we've started that. But we do have that program, so we have to be able to do that somehow. So let's work through a process that we can do that. And if we need to have sinking funds from now on, let's work through that to get that done. But in my opinion, the way this bill is written at this point, we can't use any money from the school foundation program to get that done. And then, or keep upkeep on those. And currently, it says that we can't use any money on the enhancement projects that we all have had in the past. So that's the concern from districts. And again, I would tell you that I don't think that we're opposed to having this conversation, but it would be nice to be at the table and talk about all of the different things that we have. If we go through an interim process, that would be much more appropriate, in my opinion, than trying to pass this, where I believe that there are some real big issues with it. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Questions for Dr. Brown? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else in the room that would like to testify on this bill? I know we have some folks online, but it looks like they're all signed up for the next bill, so is
Madam
that correct?
Chairman, you do have a couple signed up for this bill. They're not raising their hands, so I'm hoping that if they want to talk, they'll do so now. There we go. Mr. Flatt would like to speak on
Okay,
this.
go ahead, let him in.
Okay, he is joining the room now, Madam Chairman.
Go ahead, we're running a little short on time. We're going to try and get a couple more bills in, so please keep it short. Thanks. Introduce yourself.
Thanks. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Matt Flett, Chief Financial Officer in Natrona County School District. I apologize for not being there in person this morning, but my regular job got in the way. First, ditto to all the previous testimony and agree with their opposition points. Over the past 20 years, the taxpayers in Wyoming has invested close to $750 million, or $750 million in facilities in our school district. Our locally elected board of trustees not take that investment lightly. So I'm not going to talk too much on the major portions. I think we all kind of have received testimony on that and the points there. I want to shed light on what we have done in our district with our special reserve that our board of trustees created in 2019. And I think it'll shed a little more light on the types of expenditures, at least from the Natrona County School District, has spent on that. And I say that because there's 48 school districts in the state, 48 different circumstances. So just real briefly, since fiscal year 19, we've spent about $825,000 renovating our secure vestibules in our schools. So to Senator Rossfus' point, there is major maintenance security funding that was attached to that. And we just had to augment it. It wasn't sufficient enough. So we spent close to $900,000 in additional funds to renovate our secure vestibules to make our schools safer. We spent $51,000 on lockers at a middle school because major maintenance does not pay for additional lockers. So without that flexibility, we wouldn't have had a funding source to pay for additional lockers. We spent $560,000 on parking over at Pathways Innovation Center. When we first built PIC, the number of students taking CT classes wasn't as much as it was now, so we had a parking issue. So that's another item our special reserve paid for. We've spent through that time about $600,000 converting classroom space, classroom space into CT space and just remodeling classroom space. Again, to Senator Rothfuss' point, major maintenance has restrictions on how we can use it. And in this case, we had to use our special reserve to renovate over $500,000 of classroom space. We have about $1.3 million budgeted for playground equipment, or in our case, about $75,000 per school. Playgrounds are expensive. Major maintenance can pay for that, the placement of some of those items, but it's gotten more expensive. There might be a playground set where it needs to have ADA that we've never had before, and this funding just goes to supplement that major maintenance funding that is already tight. And again, that's just a local decision our board of trustees made. Lastly, the newest project, we have about $1.1 million budgeted for a new driver's education range. So if any of you know Casper, we've always had our driver's education range on state leased property. It was over at the soccer fields for a number of years, and then it got moved to the Ford Wyoming Event Center. When the WYO Sports Ranch was built, the city of Casper said, we need that now. We need your driving range for more parking at our event center. So we had to go back to the drawing board and say, what are we going to do? So we had some land, and we use our special reserve to, we're right now building our new driver's ed range for our students. So without that flexibility for the special reserve that is currently in statute, our ability for the types of projects I just referenced, I just don't think would happen. About every dollar we spend on the special reserve goes back to the students in the Trona County School District. Senate File 156 has an adverse impact on, most importantly, the students in the Trona County School District, and secondly, the ability for us to continue to maintain and care for our $750 million in facilities the taxpayers have invested in our district. Lastly, I agree with Dr. Brown. At the very least, I think this is interim topic. There's major implication on the major maintenance side, and I think at the very least, that is probably the prudent way to go. So with that, we do oppose this bill, and thank you for your time, and I can stand by for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fleck. Any questions? Okay, thank you for your testimony. I think we'll go ahead and close testimony down. We have 2 more bills, and we've got an hour and 12 minutes to try to get through them. So let's close public testimony, and unless, Senator, do you have any closing remarks or, nope, okay. What's your pleasure, committee?
Move the bill.
Okay, the bill's been moved. Any amendments?
I think, I'm sorry. Madam Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
go ahead and move what's marked as the Driscoll Amendment number 1 to 156. I think the in-progress projects have to be addressed. There's probably a different way to do this, maybe a better way to do this, but given our time, I think this amendment is sufficient enough for now to address the projects in progress. Excuse me.
Discussion on the amendment. Okay, let's take a vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the Driscoll amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay, that amendment is passed. Any other amendments? Okay, question on the bill. Oh, please, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, I'm going to be a no on the bill. I do understand the need to ensure that our major maintenance funding is going to major maintenance, but the system we have right now it's complicated, but that's what happens, right? We heard in the testimony just now that the process in place is designed as it is in some part to overcome the shortfalls that we've built into funding major maintenance in the first place, where we had a good discussion the other day that we dramatically short major maintenance funding. You know, when we look at the statute and when you look at what this does, the idea that we would no longer be able to use major maintenance funding for major building and facility repair replacement, why would we pass that? I can't even fathom why we would pass that and say, no, you can't use major maintenance to work on your sidewalk. That's nonsense. Of course you need to do that. The idea that you couldn't replace your playground equipment, which again, major building and facility repair. Renovation is challenging to actually achieve, but again, this is banning renovation. You have to submit that through school facilities to get a renovation approved because you're pretty limited in the space of what you're allowed for renovation currently. But again, we probably should move more towards renovation. That's a cost savings. I know that the Trona County School District has done 2 or 3 renovations in recent years that saved the state a lot of money because that was instead of replacing the schools. Great way to use major maintenance funds to reprogram those classrooms. And I still haven't heard a single example where the system currently is being abused. I mean, we have 0 examples of why we would pass this bill and countless discussions of where this bill falls short. And, you know, least of which is this idea that any square footage beyond the qualified square footage that we calculate, the allowable square footage, falls into the enhancement category. And so the idea that we pass this legislation and say, I'm sorry, we can't use major maintenance funding to repair the roof on that side of the building because you don't need it anymore, again, is just detrimental to what we need to accomplish. So I think the intent of this bill, which is an intent I share, to keep major maintenance funding directed at major maintenance operations so that we can preserve the fleet is a great idea. And if there's more we can do there, we should work through that on school facilities during the interim and figure out how to do that. This bill would be very detrimental to our school facilities around the state because we would stop keeping up those buildings in the way that we need to. and wouldn't be able to appropriately utilize the funds where they're needed, again, based on allowable square footage and other calculations. So, if this bill were just, you can't spend major maintenance money on new buildings, then it would be redundant with the current system, and it would do no harm. As the good senator said, either it does nothing or maybe it does that. That alone would be just fine. I don't think we can do that right now. We heard testimony that you can't build a new building right now with major maintenance funding, so that would be fine. But it does so much more than that. And I don't think we fully understand or comprehend how significant this legislation is in terms of what it would do. We heard all very concerned testimony from the districts that are utilizing the major maintenance as best they can. So I think we should be very cautious on this. And if we want to look at this more, let's do it in the interim. But I think we would need several more hours to really work this bill to get it to the point where it would be ready for prime time.
Any other comments? Okay. I feel very much the same. I'll probably be a no vote as well. I think it's a great interim topic, but we'll see where it goes. Okay, let's take roll. Oh, sorry, Senator Brennan.
Madam Chair, I'll be a yes to send this to the body. I'm not sure if that will be the case as it goes through.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, let's take roll.
Madam Chairman, on Senate File 156, expenditure of state funds on K-12 public schools do pass as amended. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Olson?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss?
No.
Senator Scott?
Aye.
Chairwoman Schuler?
No.
3 aye, 2 no.
Okay, that bill is passed. Senator Driscoll, you can take it to the floor and see if you can get it across the finish line up there. Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead with our next bill, fixing reading failure. We started on this bill and we made a few changes. And so I'll turn the time over to Senator Scott.
Madam Chairman, we did, as you know, and you investigated the possibility of a substitute bill, and there were real-time problems with that. We met, Superintendent Eggenfelder approached me and offered to meet and try to see if we could come to a compromise agreement. And I recruited Senator Olson because he'd been involved in the discussion on the substitute bill idea. We met with the State Department and came up with a compromise amendment, Madam Chairman. I would say generally what it does is it enhances the bill by putting in more detail on the functions that are there. It doesn't change the fundamentals of the bill, but it does put a considerable enhancement in it. You've all got it as the proposed amendment. I can take you through that quickly if that's what you want, Madam Chairman.
Committee, what would you prefer? Yeah, just a high level.
Okay. Madam Chairman, just going through it very quickly, the red is the new material. The reading difficulty definition is from the State Department, except the last sentence is originally from the original bill. It just is a more complete definition there. The next item is the State Department felt strongly in terms of defining these diagnostic instruments identified through screening. This again gives more detail as to what's going to be going on and states quite bluntly that students identified with the reading difficulty, an individual reading plan should be developed to identify and track appropriate evidence-based interventions. The change to 15 days was a drafting error in the original bill. Madam Chairman, it had been as soon as practical, and at the advice of the department, we had changed that to the 15 days and we missed a place, and that's what that is. On the second page, the top of the page, a parent with student on an individual reading plan shall have the right to request a grade 3 retention for their student. I think that's true anyhow, Madam Chairman, but department wanted it spelled out, so that's there. And then there's on page 18 after line 7, where a student has been retained, providing the various provisions. This is language from the department that specifies the kinds of things that need to be done for that student. It's significantly more detailed, Madam Chairman. I suspect over the years this will change as people get more experience in this area, but I think it's a very good start from the experts at the department. At the bottom of the page, accepting the high-performing school districts is defined. School district funds shall be expended there, pushing using the continuing education funds in some very specific ways. Again, it's more detail, more intervention on the districts that aren't doing so well. The department felt strongly about those. And then at the bottom of the page, school districts requiring employees responsible for curriculum selection, oversight, district special education, supervision of district employees, et cetera. They get them some continuing education in this area, and the department felt very strongly about that this, after all, does appear to be a management problem, and let's try to get the management a little better educated in this area, Madam Chairman. And that goes over onto the last page, and then you've got a bunch of conforming renumbering. Madam Chairman, the things that were not included fell into several boats. There was a exception that would have provided a loophole that you could drive a truck through that I have seen criticized in other states that adopted it. That got left out. There were a number of things, frankly, that were more appropriate for department rules, and those got left out. And then some technicalities that wouldn't be needed right along, Madam Chairman, but could well be looked at as the interim, because we will have to periodically look at this. There's fairly delayed effective dates on many of the items within the bill as it comes before you. So we will have time to refine some of those things, Madam Chairman. But that's the amendment and the background on it, and I don't know whether the department wants to comment on it or not.
Questions for Senator Scott before we turn it over to the department? Questions? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and have the agency come on up and give us your take on this lengthy, complicated bill that hopefully we've fixed a little bit with your help. Thank you. Please introduce
morning.
yourself.
Madam Chairwoman and committee members. Shelley Hamill with Wyoming Department of Education, speaking on behalf of Superintendent Dagenfelder. She wishes for me to express her gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to collaborate and to find compromise on some points of this bill. She wants me to extend her concerns that this still does not bring the statute to where she believes that it needs to be, and looks forward to continuing to work on reform of that statute. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Hamill? Okay. Thank you so much. All right. Let's go ahead and open it up for public participation on this bill. Senate File 178. Please introduce yourself.
Madam Chairman, Bill Winningham from Sublette County. I've observed the legislature over the years attempting to cope with various aspects of education, putting in bills like this, and they seek to fix specific things. I had a conversation Monday after this bill was initially brought up with Superintendent Dagenfelder, and I expressed much of the same opinions I'm going to express to you right now. I think some of them got into the legislation from her. I'd like to think so, but anyway. The problem you got is the block grant model as it works with regard to reading, and specifically instructional facilitators, allows some fiddling with things, fiddling with the money and so on. And I think you need a fundamental change in what you do with reading and literacy instructional facilitators. I saw something done to one out in Sublette County, my wife. She graduated with a master's degree in reading with distinction. She was brought in as an IF for reading because they had a sliding ramp in ACT scores, and during her 3 years there, their ACT scores went up 8%. I'd say that's not bad. And then they got rid of her. Why did they get rid of her? Well, the superintendent was overheard by a tradesman saying, you know, I get rid of faculty over 40 if I can because they're just too expensive on health care. Hence my words about fiddling with the numbers. So what's the fundamental change that I would offer you? I believe you need to put a reading IF in every school. You're going to have to work the numbers. How many IFs? How big is the school? You certainly have a lot of small schools. You know, there's a 4J school up there near Gillette, I think it is. There's certainly the Bondurant School very close to my place. So you don't need one full-time there, of course. I got it. But then you need to take them out of the block grant. The state needs to fund their salary and their health care and pay attention to their collateral duties. My wife was used as a testing coordinator, requiring hundreds of hours of time that were, of course, not devoted to reading and literacy. And so that's the fundamental change I offer you. You know, IFs cannot be seen as a line by other teachers as a line to the administration. And so they need that kind of freedom. And that's what taking it out of the block grant would do for you, is it makes them independent as they need to be, so teachers have confidence and can talk with them. And I'd also note you heard some words from Senator Driscoll just a little bit ago, talking about the block grant and his perceptions of how they do business. So that's what I offer you, Madam Chairman. I subject to your questions. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Winnie? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Others in the room that would like to testify on this bill? Please introduce yourself.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, I'm Tate Mullen, Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I'm just going to start with, this was a big bill to begin with, and where we are at right now, this isn't ready for prime time. This is something we need to take up on the interim to make sure that all the voices that need to be in that room to contribute, the experts on this issue, are in that room. I do want to go through a few things. I don't want to belabor a lot of the points. I know we're short on time, but I think that some of the testimony that we heard on Monday from our educators and our practitioners about the relevance of growth compared to a single snapshot, the literacy component on Wyatop, and what that has looked like for third graders. I don't want to reiterate those, but I think those are really, really vitally important to this discussion. I think that addressing this as an alternative policy as an effective means to address student performance is going to be important. So we need to understand the body of research that is out there regarding student retention. We've got about 75 years worth of research on this topic. The unfortunate resurgence of retention as an effective or viable policy solution is based on only a handful of recent studies. Notably, Thomas B. Fordham's Institute, so Think Again, Is Grade Retention Bad for Kids, as well as Hong and Kodel's Indiana test-based retention. Aside from those studies, the 75 years that we have prior to that has shown that retention is an ineffective means at bolstering student performance. not only is it ineffective, it has significant unintended consequences. So where the shortcomings within those studies that I mentioned, one of those shortcomings was that the study does not examine the long-run effects on retention, including outcomes in high school or the effects of other non-academic outcomes such as self-esteem, peer relationships, or confidence. So we have significant dropout rates associated with retention. So mandatory retention policies have a direct and positive correlation to higher dropout rates at the end of middle school and high school. This gets us to the issue of the school to prison pipeline. Those students that drop out in a state that incarcerates its youth at the #1 rate in the nation is unwise to implement a policy that only perpetuates students dropping out and potentially becoming part of that school to prison pipeline. So aside from the not examining the long run effects, they did note that one of the things that was left out there was that those effects that they did see in the two studies are only effective with additional supports. I will say that I did have the chance to very quickly go through the amendments here. On the amendment language, the page 18 after 7, those are some of the practices that do work. Those practices can be implemented during a school year, all right? And those are more cost effective than retaining that student. And there are a number of other policies and practices that are more cost effective, that doesn't have the negative impact on the student. So now that we understand where we're at in terms of our research, I do want to walk through just a couple of pieces within the bill that were concerning. Again, the percentages, right? The scores on YTOP. I'm concerned about those arbitrary thresholds and what that means for those students. I will say this has been revised a little bit. I did like to see that the majority of the pieces were not mandatory retention. That being said, there is a mandatory retention, I believe, on page for third grade where they can't come up with an agreement with the parent, as well as a fourth grade with those caveats attached to it. I'd say this, we've had long discussions about parental rights. We want parents to be engaged. A mandatory retention where it necessitates a student, regardless of the parent's input or engagement, seems a little counter to the discussions we've been having about parental rights, especially when we take into consideration the problems that we see with retention policies on students. On page 21, so again, for a policy that is questionable at best in its efficacy, the damages piece seems very heavy-handed to me. If we're going to explore this policy, I don't think we need to be leveling these types of potential damages for a policy that in past years has proven not to work. Page 22, and this was an issue that we brought up before, and this is the role of the courts. Judges they're not experts in reading interventions and policies. To have them set something is well beyond the scope of their role. Their role is to be an adjudicator, a finder of fact as it pertains to case law. That is not the role of the courts, and I think that I would be remiss, I don't want to speak out of school, but I can't imagine there's a judge out there that is going to be very comfortable with mandating some sort of intervention that he's not familiar with. The amendments, there were a couple of pieces here. Again, I will say that page 2, line 18, or the language, page 18 after 7, those are effective interventions, so I'm glad to see that those were added. The mandate of dollars, again, we know we're short in terms of some of our districts with their resources. That and the professional development, we've already got a number of PD days, as was mentioned on Monday. we're also working on a bill that cuts days. So we have more required PD within less time to complete that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think it's dangerous just to put something on the books so that we can work it. I think the more prudent approach to this is let's take our time. Let's get it right. We all want the best for our students. We want them to perform. We want our districts to do well. This isn't ready for prime time. This needs to be discussed during the interim where we have all parties who can bring their expertise into the room, who can have this conversation. This just feels very rushed, and I would urge you to please consider tabling this bill and moving forward during the interim. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Mullen? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else that would like to testify on this bill, please come forward. Welcome back, Dr. Brown.
Madam Chair, Boyd Brown, Executive Director for the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. Wish that I was here testifying like I did on Senate File 13, where we had a good interim session on some of the reading stuff that's passed through the Senate already. And I'm not going to belabor a lot. I would like to see this bill, or the work that the WDE has put into the amendment that they brought the other day, go through that session. The Wyoming Department of Education has done a great job on reading, working with experts out there. We have experts in our districts. We have experts outside of our district that we can work with to bring something back that would be very much more appropriate and would bring our reading scores up much more quickly than what this will do. I don't see this as being something that's going to increase our reading scores. And with that, I'll take questions.
Questions for Dr. Brown? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, Nick Bellack, Wyoming School Boards Association. And I'll echo, the school boards do absolutely believe in this, in what it's aiming for, but definitely have a couple concerns with the bill in its current form. When we talk about research-based, that's a very wide spread of what is research-based. So the bill talks about what we call the Big Five, the science of teaching reading. It does not explicitly state the science of teaching reading. I'll talk a little bit about the alignment. Do we know if the assessment stated in the bill is actually aligned to the science of teaching reading? Do we know that it produces the categorical results that you can extract what is actually needed to be done within the science of teaching reading to make those instructional decisions? And then thirdly, does the results come at a timely manner where instructional decisions can actually come and be made so that those tweaks can be done within the classroom? The test that PTSB will likely use, I have a lot of experience with in at least 25 states. I've seen 25 states go through bills like this and make these decisions as well. One of the things that's very concerning, especially with that test, it allows only one avenue for an educator to renew their license, and that is the test. Now, if that teacher has not had training on the science of teaching reading to which that test is precisely aligned, it's going to be very difficult for them to pass that. I've seen other states that have had a couple different ways, a district-approved science of teaching reading program or passing the test to renew the license to do that. And that's how some of the other states have addressed this. So with that, there's lingering questions, there's assumptions, there's data to consider, there's alignment issues with tests, there's employee retention issues, especially if they can't pass that praxis test. So with that, I think this is precisely where states have been at this point in the bill at their rough draft points. Now, the next step to get this precise, to get this to the place where it needs to be, is going to take a lot of work, a lot of stakeholder input to get it to that place. And I think we're all aiming at lifelong literacy as that place that we want to be. And in order to do that, it's going to take a lot of work to get there. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for Mr. Bellack? Okay, thank you so much. Any other ones in the room that would like to testify, please come forward.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Megan Hesser. I am the parent of a dyslexic student. I am also a literacy advocate and a private tutor. I have a master's in reading science, and while there are some very good things in this bill, one of the biggest things being make sure that there is professional development for your administrators and your curriculum folks and everyone underneath. Because I've seen it in Laramie County 1, where there is a failure of management because they don't understand what literacy looks like, what intervention should look like. They don't understand the qualifications that their teacher should have for intensive interventions. I'm sorry, but a special education master's degree from the University of Wyoming is not going to cut it for most of our kids who are in Tier 3 for reading. It's just not. On the term, there's a few language pieces that are currently sitting here that I have some issue with. We have removed the word dyslexia almost entirely out of, except for definitions. I understand reading difficulties. Signs of reading difficulties and dyslexia was a clunky way to say it in the first statute. However, we have schools in our state that still say that the state does not recognize dyslexia, and that is a problem. Whether you want to call it reading difficulties or you want to call it dyslexia in your school building, they still need the awareness that it is a real issue that many of their students are facing. Because it gives those kids that think they're weird horses a label to know that they're actually a zebra. They're not a weird horse. They're not just deficient in some way. And that's helpful for a lot of students. The other language piece that I have concerns with is that it does say research-based, and to the previous speaker's point, it should probably say evidence-based, because that means it has been researched and replicated, and there is evidence that the research works. And I am wholeheartedly in favor of PTSB testing changing, because the only way you are actually going to get teachers to know what they're doing in the classroom is if they can pass the test that actually assesses the skills that students need in the classroom. And the praxis that we have now, it's just not going to cut it. And to the point someone also made earlier about the damages being too high. I know parents who are paying funeral expenses because their child was so traumatized and depressed and anxious because of their undiagnosed dyslexia that they committed suicide at 11 years old. I argue that maybe this isn't enough in damages. I've done a survey of some of the parents from across the state that I could find who have students with reading difficulties. There were 39 families who answered that poll. Some of you have heard these results because it was from last fall. We've had a couple of new families that filled it out later. Out of those 39 families, 7 or 8 paid under $2,000 between outside evaluations and what have you. And then their school kicked in and did what they needed to do to remediate those reading issues. For the rest of us, we have spent over $1 million. That's 30 families that have spent over $1 million in the state of Wyoming for funeral expenses, attorneys to fight their schools, private tutors for after school. And that's a lot for those kids, and that is a lot for those families, and it impacts the whole family at that point. It's not just the student who's struggling anymore. We have to fix it for all of those people. And I argue that 60% is not enough for your high-performing districts. And I'm gonna, because which one of you wants to look at a photo array of 10 kids from that district and say, this 4 doesn't get to learn to read at grade level? Who wants to make that call? I argue that even our high performing at 60%, is it really that high performing? Is it really going to move the needle for our whole state if we allow it to be that low of a percentage? And I get the YTOP is not the perfect assessment. I get it. However, if we are truly teaching our children to read at a proficient level for their grade, your test scores for YTOP are going to increase, because they don't have the cognitive load and the worry and the anxiety from the test, because the bulk of it that is reading just got a lot easier because they know how to do it proficiently. And right now our students don't know how to do it proficiently, not on a grand scale. I'm also, I will say I agree, retention is not the answer. Retention is further punishment to these students. It is not their fault that they can't read at this point. It is a failure of our schools. It is a failure of the institutions who are training our teachers. It should not be another burden that is put on the student's shoulders. Everything that is in page 18 after line 7, that whole list of interventions, let's do that without retention. Those are all great aspects, but let's do it without retention. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Okay, questions from Ms. Esther? Yes, go ahead, Senator Olson.
I just want to go back to your concern, to making sure I'm understanding it correctly, with dyslexia being inside the statutes. And the definition of reading difficulty, it says reading difficulty includes dyslexia and other reading difficulties. So we're making sure it's within the definition of reading difficulties. What more do you think we could do to incorporate that?
Ms. Esther?
It will be overlooked. It will be, if it's not in front of them at about every turn of the page, it will be ignored. It has been for decades at this point, been ignored. We still have schools in Laramie County 1 that will tell you dyslexia does not exist and our state does not recognize it.
Other questions for Ms. Esther? Okay, yes, go ahead, Senator Brandon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairwoman. Hopefully I can formulate my question right. When you have somebody with reading difficulties versus dyslexia, and I think both are issues. Our students need to read regardless of what difficulties they have. Is there a difference in some of the interventions and ways that you work with those students, or is it pretty similar?
Chairwoman, Senator Brennan, it's not. What every student needs to learn to read, the basis is the same. What changes is the intensity, the repetitions, the amount of time that's needed to master those skills. And this is where some people have a problem with the word dyslexia, because it doesn't have a definitive cutoff. There's not one single test and one single score that can say you have it or you don't. It's a gray scale. Reading itself is a gray scale from black to white and every shade in between. And so while I sometimes don't care if you don't use the word dyslexia, because it doesn't matter. If you can't read, you can't read. Doesn't matter what you call it. At the end of the day, for some students, that label, quote unquote, is kind of a game changer, because it's not their fault if they feel stupid.
Okay, other questions? Okay. All right, thank you so much for your testimony. Anyone else in the room? I know we have some folks online that would like to testify. Anyone else in the room? Okay. Those of you that are online, again, we're kind of running short on time, so we'd love to hear from you, but if you could keep it to about 2 minutes, that would be lovely. So go ahead and bring on whoever you'd like. Ashley?
Madam Chairman, Annie Griffin is at the top of my list, so we're going to start there.
Okay.
When it brought me on, it blipped, and so I'm assuming.
Welcome, please introduce yourself. And keep it real short if you could.
I sure will. So my name's Annie Griffin, and I need to give you a little bit of back history so that you understand what I'm bringing to the table in terms of knowledge base. So 26-year educator, bachelor in elementary ed, master's in reading K-12, and endorsements in administration, 18-year teacher. I'm an ed consultant for the PLC Group Solution Tree, and I go all over the nation reading and overall achievement through the collaborative process. I was a 5-year principal at Tongue River Elementary, and within our 4th year, we achieved Blue Ribbon status. And I'm in my 3rd year as superintendent and special education director in Washakie School District 2. And we were named the #1 academic school in the state per the YTOP 2023-24 results. I believe this bill needs some rewriting. I believe there's some good intent and wanting to make sure that our students are all reading at proficiency. YTOP, though first, is not a true measure of reading achievement because it does not address phonics or phonemic awareness, as well as other indicators of reading success. Our building screeners do. YTOP measures the third graders' testing ability on a platform that they are seeing for the first time. I personally have watched third graders cry, even my own children, because of the rigor that is handed to them on YTOP. I appreciate the work Superintendent Dagenfelder has done to limit the amount of testing in some of these problem areas. Although I am very pleased of how my students in Washakie County School District 2 performed on YTOP, I also understand that one day is not indicative of who they are as a learner. It is so much more complex than that. Using YTOP, which measures only a subset of skills not related to reading achievement, would be a disservice to our students. I'm going to skip the part that I was going to speak to in regards to retention, as it's already been discussed, and the mental and lasting effects on our students. We can intervene within the school year and support these students. In our schools, many of us understand we have to collaborate to work to get every child to grade level through that process of assessment, intervention, reassessment, and analysis for every child. As educators, please understand, we do not quit on any child. And to believe that is the case, I have worked in states from California to Iowa to Wisconsin. Not one person that is an educator in those states wants to give up on our students. The statewide RTI, multi-system tiered of support, and the professional learning community initiative, for which I have been a participant in and am now a coach, is building the capacity of schools, school by school by school. We're getting better and better through our processes. We are training our teachers. We are offering letters through a state initiative for administrators so we can better understand how to lead schools in reading instruction. Our supports are getting more robust, and again, we don't give up on even one student. Rather than creating further paperwork for schools by adding more staff to WDE, my recommendation is to consider providing a reading specialist to failing school districts, require that they take part in the PLC grant or that their teachers attend letters training, support them, not punish them. When I have trained across the states, they all want the same thing, to see our students succeed. I am a Wyoming graduate, and I grew up in a household where you put your money where your mouth is, and when you know better, you do better. I believe heavily in early intervention programming, so I started Project Gift in the Tongue River Valley. I read to daycare and preschool students and sought grant funds to be able to give them a book each month with parent recommendations and training. I encourage families to not only read, but to bond with their children through one-on-one time enjoying a great book. I started a similar project in 10 Sleep, and I believe if children are spoken with and read to by their parents before ever attending school, we don't have failure in reading. Build their vocabulary and connection, and they thrive. I believe this is one of the factors that raise the bar so high in Tongue River Elementary enough to achieve that blue ribbon. I encourage you to focus on intervening early, focus on training our teachers, focus on the schools that know what works, and build a program where they help schools that are struggling. Lean on the experts in the field and focus legislation on what truly matters for our children, not on being punitive to our educational system. Know that there are people out there, such as myself, willing to come to the table and help find positive solutions that will make things better for every single child in the state of Wyoming. I encourage you to move away from this bill and come to the table in the interim to discuss opportunities for growth in our educational system. Thank you for your time, and to the committee, thank you for your time as well. I'll now field any questions.
Questions for Ms. Griffin? Thank you for what you're doing. Sounds like you're doing some good things up there. Thanks so much for your testimony. All right, who else do we have online?
Madam Chairman, Aaron Zinsky will be joining us here in just a sec.
Thank you for coming. Please introduce yourself. And again, we're running short on time, so if you could just keep it to a couple of minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good morning, Chairwoman Schuler and members of the committee. I am Dr. Erin Pazinski, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today in support of this bill. I'm a lifelong Wyoming resident, a graduate of the University of Wyoming. I earned my doctorate in reading science through Mount St. Joseph University, and I'm a national letters facilitator. Although I do not speak on behalf of my district, I am also the K-12 literacy instructional facilitator in Weston 1. First off, Senator Scott, members of the committee, I want to thank you for prioritizing literacy instruction in Wyoming. Reading proficiency is the foundation of all learning, and your leadership in advancing evidence-based reading instruction is commendable. This legislation has the potential to make a lasting impact on Wyoming students, ensuring that they receive the instruction they need to succeed. I come before you today as an advocate for strong literacy policies and as the parent and educator in a district that would likely be considered high performing under this bill as it is currently written. While I'm proud of the progress that our students have made, I know firsthand that even in high performing schools, too many of our students are still struggling with reading. A 60% proficiency rate means that 4 out of 10 of our students are not reading at grade level. That is nearly half of our students that are struggling with a foundational skill that's going to impact the rest of their education and their future success. Allowing districts to opt out of at that threshold creates an uneven system where some students will receive the highest quality instruction, while others, simply because of where they live, may not. Every child, regardless of their zip code, deserves access to the most effective research-based literacy instruction, drawing on over 30 years of reading and implementation science. Additionally, I appreciate the inclusion of professional development in this bill. Effective literacy instruction begins with well-trained educators who have a deep understanding of the science of reading. Research has shown that reading is not an innate skill, but one that must be explicitly taught using systematic, evidence-based methods. Professional development in the science of reading equips teachers with the knowledge and strategies necessary to provide high-quality structured literacy instruction that benefits all students, particularly those who struggle with reading. Without proper training, educators may unknowingly rely on ineffective methods that can hinder students' ability to become proficient readers. And finally, I urge you to consider that we need to ensure that this support continues beyond the early grades with a comprehensive plan for literacy in Wyoming. While I fully support the strong focus that we see here on early literacy, we know that reading struggles do not simply end after 3rd grade. Without continued intervention, students who fall behind often stay behind, affecting their ability to succeed in middle school and high school. Strong literacy legislation must ensure that struggling readers beyond K3 are getting the support they need to be successful. And once again, I want to thank this committee for recognizing the importance of effective literacy instruction. I agree wholeheartedly with the superintendent that this is a good start. There are definitely some things that we can do to make this legislation more robust, but your leadership on this issue is commendable, and I urge you to consider these concerns as you refine this bill. Wyoming has an opportunity to set a high standard for literacy education, and I encourage you to make this as strong and as impactful as possible for our Wyoming students. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Sinsky? Okay, thanks for what you do, and we'll move on to the next one. Thanks.
Madam Chairman, Scott Stoltz is joining the room right now.
Okay, welcome you, man. Welcome, Mr. Stoltz. Good to see you again.
Yes, you as well. Welcome, Chairman Schuler and the Education Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you today. I'm Scott Stoltz, Superintendent of School District 2 in Sheridan. I was there on Monday, but unfortunately was not able to testify and am back in the winter wonderland. But regarding the bill, I would like to speak to, I certainly appreciate the focus and the need for proficiency in 3rd grade readers. The data is crystal clear. Students need to be proficient because their future is only being hindered by that lack of opportunity. I also appreciate the accountability within the bill as well, because we do need to be accountable for the quality of product that we produce each and every day, as well as a high-performing school clause that's within that bill. However, there are many concerns that I do have with the bill itself. First of which is the YTOP assessment. Even though I firmly believe that the YTOP does measure where our students are regarding what we expect them to know and be able to do, when we look at 3rd grade reading, it's actually the English language arts assessment, not a reading assessment. So when we look at the state average, which is 53%, which obviously needs to get better, it is a highly rigorous assessment that we know, and I'm not concurring that we need to drop the bar at all, because I think high accountability is necessary. But that doesn't mean that 40% of those students are non-readers. It does not equate to that. So we have to be careful to use that data to truly use it to what it really measures. Retention has been discussed as a means of an intervention. All we're doing when we retain a student by data is saying that we're increasing their dropout rate by 28%. We look at summer school as funding. Yeah, that's somewhat effective, but yet we've also seen a reduce in funding for providing opportunities for summer school options for our kids. It also talks about private tutors where the district would pay for that, as well as working with parents. And that is absolutely required and necessary. They are our first teacher. We need to work with them collaboratively because we have to do it together. But yet, as was testified earlier, if we can't agree with parents on what the plan is, then the court gets to decide that. That is a concern. Also looking at Wyoming Department of Education, where there would be a focus on an operational research staff. Research is necessary, needed, yet it needs to be what is most effective and what is research-based and what does it look like in our schools, as opposed to the verbs conducting, providing, completing, managing. Actually, those verbs need to be coaching, working alongside of school districts where it's a hands-on approach, where we're working on this together. Just as Annie suggested, that maybe we have a reading specialist that's working with school districts to help them do things differently. Because the definition of insanity is working in some of these places where they continue to do the same thing over and over and expect different results. We've got to change what we're doing. We've got to change a different focus. And I believe one of the things that's glaringly missing from this is teachers. Teachers make the biggest impact on student learning, 6 times the biggest difference, but we're not talking about teachers. We're talking about what can we punitively do to schools that aren't meeting the expectations. Rather, we need to work more effectively with teachers. And I'm not all about throwing money at things because I know that doesn't fix the problem. Yet I would concur that over the years that I've been in education, it's been over 30 years, when we saw an influx of funding for teachers, we saw an increase of quality candidates. We're not competitive anymore regarding what does that look like across the nation. So by increasing the opportunity for pay, and I would argue that we spend every penny, and I believe every district does it well, as far as money that's allocated towards teacher salaries. Teacher salary base is $40,000 that the state reimburses us for. Our base is $51,000. So we supplement at least $11,000 for every teacher in our district to ensure that we have a strong base, which is not necessarily competitive. So we need to see more opportunities to recruit, retain teachers because they make the biggest difference. And working on the right work with the high quality teachers is going to have the biggest impact. And when we see a theme throughout the legislature with House Bill 100, House Bill 200, Senate File 72, where we're reducing days of working with kids, we don't have enough as it is. We need that high quality time with kids, and we need to continue to support education with the ways that we can do that most effectively. So my recommendation would to lay back this bill, look at it as an minimum topic so we can slow this down and spend the quality time to make sure that we're doing this right. I agree with the intent of the bill, but I think it can be done and written better so that truly is making the biggest impact that we can on students and student learning. And the last thing I would close with was, I don't know if this was a test or not, but in reading for the bill, ironically enough, there was a typo. If you want to look at letter T, you can read through that yourself and see that there was in fact a typo in the bill itself. But nevertheless, thank you for the opportunity, and I would stand for any questions.
Thank you for Mr. Stoltz for what you do up there. You're doing some great things. Do we have any questions for Mr. Stoltz? Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Absolutely.
Anyone else online? Ashley?
Madam Chairman, you have 2 more.
Gracious.
And we're bringing in Chase Christensen right now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Could you keep it really short? We're really we're closing in on the end of our testimony. So as short as, we want to hear from you, but just keep it really succinct. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say, concur with the comments Superintendents Stoltz and Griffin provided, as well as Ms. Pawzinski. I think there was some excellent speaking there. Just wanted to add a couple points. The bill does have a requirement for a district to pay for a private tutor for part of these individual reading plans. It also talks about summer programming. I believe that those are unfunded. I think that the bill has some tremendous supports for schools built into it, but those supports would benefit all schools. I think that the division between a high-performing school and a low-performing school, oftentimes we see that schools fall into that low-performing category because of principal turnover or teacher turnover. And I believe that it's incumbent upon us, the legislature and the state, to be providing more support in those instances. Talk about instructional coaches, reading and literacy experts to be providing the best support and coaching for our teachers in their classroom in the moment, so that all of our students are learning at a high level. And I think all students need that. It's not going to be just those that are in a low performing school or that have reading difficulties. We should be doing the best we can for all of our readers in the state. I think instructional coaching is an important thing to look at within the model. I do want to recognize for the bringer of the bill that the three districts that have spoke online here are in that high performing category and likely will continue to be so. But the reason we're here today is because we've had the tenure and the experience to get to where we're at, and low performing schools often don't have the people in place to do that. So recognize that we care about all the students across the state. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any questions for Mr. Christensen? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you for all that you do with your students as well. Anybody else?
Last one, Madam Chairman, Mike Hamill.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good
Madam
morning.
Chair.
If you could just keep it to 2 minutes, we would really appreciate it. We do want to hear from you, though. Please
Yes,
introduce yourself.
My name is Mike Hamill. I'm superintendent with Carbon County School District Number 1 in Rollins, Wyoming. Proud graduate of the University of Wyoming and proud educator in the state for 36 years in the state and 38 and a half years overall. I'll keep my comments short. Many of the comments that have already taken place have been well received and well shared. This is a topic that is important that we get correct, and there's a lot of momentum. I stand in support of laying the bill back and having this addressed through the interim process. And those are my comments.
Okay, questions for Mr. Hamill? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and close public testimony. Committee, got to hear a lot of things today, so what is your pleasure on this bill? Okay, the bill's been moved by Senator Scott. Any ideas for amendments to the amendments that we have? Senator Olson?
I have a few, yes. So I would go to page 21. And on line 9, after relief, insert period. On line 10, strike the balance of line 10. Strike the remainder of the page.
Page 21.
21. Strike the remainder of the page on 21. On page 22, strike lines 1 and 2. On lines 4 and 5, strike line 4. And strike line 5 up to plan. And then capitalize T. And that would be my amendment, Madam Chairman. I think that I agree with some of the testimony that we heard on this, that I'm not sure we want to create a punitive measure. But by leaving this last clause in the relief section, I think we provide the relief necessary for a parent seeking to have a plan implemented is really what they want. I don't think we need to subject our school districts and schools to more lawsuits. So that would be my amendment.
Okay, any questions? Ashley, did you get that?
Yes, I did, Madam Chairman.
Okay, any discussion on that amendment?
Madam Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Just from a construct standpoint, is the assumption then that
It falls,
it falls into the paragraph?
Correct.
P? Okay.
Yeah, I was hoping that's what it would do.
I think it does, just making sure that's what your intent was.
Senator Scott, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I would resist the amendment. The point in the system, the putting in the ability to go to court, the prior experience with legislation in this literacy area, the 2001 Act, was we had a major problem with districts simply ignoring it. And the point is that if we give the parents an ability, we're looking for an enforcement mechanism, so they can't do that. And maybe there's enough left in with this amendment to overcome that, and maybe there isn't. But we do need to have some ability for the parents to go to court, some limitation, so it isn't a runaway to just profit the attorneys. But we need to have some ability for the parents to hold the district's feet to the fire and to get the money, if they get ignored, get the funds to get the necessary testing and other remedial work done privately. And was the purpose of this. I'm a little nervous that you're doing away with too much of it, and we'll have trouble with getting the districts to actually perform.
It's interesting, Senator Scott, that I had the same amendment, almost exactly. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm kind of impressed that I did that. And the only reason I did is, again, the punitive measures, I wasn't quite comfortable with that. But I do believe on page 22, if you look on line 17, it still provides the parent with a cause of action against the school district, again, if they don't do what they need to do with this. So I felt comfortable with that. But let's go ahead and vote on it, unless there's other discussion on that amendment. All those in favor of Senator Olson's amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, that amendment is passed. Any other amendments?
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Senator Scott.
I would move the amendments that we worked out with the State Department of Education. Previously explained them. I think they do enhance the bill. I would say, I know there's a lot of concern that the rest of the bill is less than perfect. I think we'll probably refine it with time, but this is a good start. And Madam Chairman, when you look at what the requirements are in the first year, there are a lot of what we're already doing, but with the emphasis that there's trouble later on if you don't succeed in getting the child fixed, and that's important. The only retention in the first year, and that stays with or without the amendment, is where the parents ask for it because the child's not mature enough. And that's a different animal. So, Madam Chairman, I think these amendments improve it, so.
Discussion on Senator Scott's amendment? I have just one little area, but I think I can do it on a second reading if this moves forward. It's very simple, so I'll just hold off on that, and that way I get a chance to talk to the good senator about it. But any other discussion on those amendments? Okay, all those in favor of Senator Scott's amendments, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Okay, that amendment is passed. Anything else on this bill? Go ahead, Senator Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have one more.
Okay.
On page 1, in the title of the bill, line 2, it says invention program, and it should say intervention.
Intervention, oh, yes.
I don't know if that's the same typo the superintendent found, but if there's another typo in the bill, I haven't seen it. So this is the only one I'm aware of.
I'll lay you pretty good odds of this, so.
Okay.
All right, any discussion on that? Yeah, teachers and lawyers are good at finding typos generally, so all those in favor of Senator Olson's amendment on line 2 to spell the word invention as intervention, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. Okay, that is also passed. Any other amendments? All right, any discussion?
Madam Chairman, real quick, the typo Superintendent Stoltz was talking about is on page 23, line 21. It says ready instead of read, if somebody would like to move that one.
Would someone like to do that? Yes, okay, Senator Brennan said she would move that. So again, read that again one more time, Ashley, page 23.
Page 23, line 21, change ready to read.
Okay. Okay, absolutely. All right, all those in favor? Any discussion first? I didn't think there would be any. All those in favor, please say aye on that. Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay, that is also passed. Anything else on the bill? All right, yes, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Senator Brennan? I think she beat you to the punch. Go ahead, Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chairwoman. We've heard a lot. We've heard a lot on this bill, and I appreciate that we all want to get reading better and is looking at this bill and I'm just going to summarize some of the concerns that I heard, that we have some mandated retention and that retention may be optional. I do think that parents, if they feel that it's best for their child to be retained, that should be definitely respected by the districts. I do believe that should be a robust discussion between parents and districts, and that parents really should have kind of a priority and preference in that. One thing that has not been a theme, but that or sort of a theme that I think is that maybe we need to really focus on empowering teachers. And I think that maybe teachers, they want students to read. I'm convinced that is their goal, that they really wanted students to come out of their classes reading. I'm not sure that in our current system, we're empowering teachers to do that like we should. And I think that we could maybe put a little more robustness in this bill for that. I do understand where we have like the high performing, but I have heard that if we carve out high performing districts, that does still leave out 40% of our students, which is really close to half of the students potentially. We also heard that maybe there should be some comprehension beyond third grade for this. And I think that that's a valid concern, that if a student has issues in third grade, they are likely to have them in fourth and fifth and beyond. And I think that we should look at those students. We've heard about the Y-TOPS, that's a language arts and not really a reading assessment. But we do know that there are certain assessments for reading. I think that that's a valid point that we can definitely dig into. We've heard about evidence-based versus research-based. I think that's something valid to pay attention to. And then one of the last things that we heard and that I thought about is there a way that we can incentivize or help train these teachers so that they have what they need? Because again, I believe that every teacher wants their kids to come out of the classroom successfully reading. But I do believe that without kind of the correct training and the correct training on the curriculum that's being used in the district, these teachers are kind of set up for failure and not empowerment like we want. So those are just some things that I think that we've heard. I do think that there are a couple of options. I think that we could lay this back and look at this in the interim, because we do have, I think, the basis of some good framework. I think if we do move this bill on, I think that we could look at some future amendments to the bill to make it better than what it is. So those are my thoughts on the bill, Madam Chairman.
Senator Ruffus, or did you want to go first? Senator
You're only the
Wilson?
last to speak, huh? Okay. All right, Madam Chairman. I think I'm going to be in favor of moving this bill forward, although I'm hearing the overarching concern that it needs more work, and I actually agree with that wholeheartedly. I agree with what Senator Brennan said. I think that if this bill moves forward, it does need some more work. I would encourage the stakeholders to work with Senator Scott, including our Department of Education, to continue to try to refine the bill and get it where it's at. I do wholeheartedly also support an interim topic on this. I think that that could be very productive as well. I think that the reality is legislation is not always perfect when it arrives in the first committee. There's a much bigger legislative process still in front of us that involves many readings on the floor, that involves another House committee, readings on the House floor. I mean, there's plenty of time to continue to work the bill and try to get it into a place where more people are comfortable with it. So I support that. I just think that the issue that we're facing is so detrimental to our education system that it needs addressed. And I'm too hesitant to wait entirely for another interim to pass entirely before we do something about it. So I would rather put this forward, start to see what it does as we study it in the interim, as we talk about it more in the interim, and work towards something that really addresses the issue long-term.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chairman.
you, Senator Olson. Senator Rothfuss?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to be a no on the bill, and I have been involved in this conversation. Many of us have for a lot of years on early childhood literacy, and it's a tough conversation. It's a tough issue, but one of the things that we've benefited from as we've worked through it is the fact that we have a lot of stakeholders and experts in our community and in our state that have studied this, that are very knowledgeable and that can bring tremendous expertise to this challenge. None of them were consulted on the draft that we have before us. That is not what we're working from. There are no experts saying that retention is the right approach. There are no experts saying that we need to be punitive to districts. There are no experts saying that certain school districts should be exempted while other school districts should be included. This is important, and it's too important to just wing it, candidly, and come up with a piece of legislation that feels like it might solve the problem without having evidence and data behind the assertion so that we can conclude that it will solve the problem, because we have clear indications where that evidence and research points to solutions to the problem. What we saw from the superintendent, I think, as a alternative remedy, which we weren't considering, I think tries to bring a lot more of those recommendations in. And again, we have expert stakeholder groups in place that have been working through some of the work that we've done over the last few years. And this isn't the first thing, to be clear. This is probably the 7th bill, I think, that we've looked at, and we've passed 5 or 6 of them in recent years that have dramatically improved, but not sufficiently improved, the landscape. And many of those haven't even really been fully implemented, right? I think the last one we passed only now is really coming into play. So it will provide an improvement, perhaps not sufficient. The idea that we just move something along as complicated as this, that really doesn't, in my view, have any beneficial parameters, again, nothing in it is strongly research-based, is worse than doing nothing. We should be focused on positive solutions, and based on where we're at right now, an interim is appropriate. An interim that brings in stakeholders and experts in particular, experts that know this, that aren't just providing their opinion but are pointing to evidence. Those are the ones that should be the key to drafting the legislation. We should be listening to them. We should be taking their wisdom in, and we should be drafting legislation towards those solutions. And it may well require additional resources, which nobody wants to hear, but the reality is these challenges require additional time, and that time has to come from somewhere. So I don't think this is the right approach. I don't think it's something where we just throw a few more amendments on and we end up with a good bill, because the entire concept of retention, to me, is horrifying as a parent. Forced retention on my kids. I have a 2nd and 5th grader right now. I've had 2 older ones go through the system. And the idea that a district would force me under any circumstance to retain that child suffering the emotional drama that would go along with that, instead of providing alternative support, it's not something I'll ever get to.
Okay, anything else? Okay, I would just echo a lot of the comments. I appreciate each and every one of you. I appreciate the work that Senator Scott and the Department of Education has done on this. Again, I would have some more amendments if this moved forward. I don't think it's quite ready. I like a lot of the concepts. There's some of them I don't, but I think an interim topic is a way to go, because it's so complicated, and we've done some good things, like I said, already, even this session, but I think there's more work to be done on this, so that would be my emphasis for a no vote. Let's go ahead and vote.
Madam Chairman, on Senate File 178, fixing reading failure, do pass as amended. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Olson?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss?
No.
Senator Scott?
Aye.
Chairwoman Schuler?
No.
3 aye, 2 no.
All right, well, we'll see if we can do some more work up on the floor, Senator Scott, and we will have to move back the other bill, I guess, to Friday. So thank you, everyone, for your testimony, and we will look forward to seeing you on Friday, our last day.